So we are in Canto 2 of Book 1, which is the issue. And the issue is all about Savitri, what she has to do in this life, who she has to become. And we see that man always has to bow down to and be obedient to the statutes fixed of old, but not Savitri, because she is superhuman. The superhuman has cast its seed into her, and her spirit is not going to hug the common soil. No way. And she doesn't even ask from mortal frailty the relief of pain, because the work she has to do, and she has to speak a word. She has to write the unfinished story of her soul. And she doesn't accept to close the luminous page or cancel her commerce with eternity. Now, we have the fact that she is even pursuing after death. Remember we covered that? Immortal aims. So even when she leaves her body, as Mother has, the work goes on. Because Mother comes again and again to this world to uplift us in different forms. I told you the story of how she came as the Virgin Mary last week. And she has come as many others, great queens, great princesses. So Savitri is not going to give up anything, because in her own self she finds her high recourse. So we begin today at the unseen's knock upon her hidden gates. Now immediately we have to stop here, because Sri Aurobindo has capitalized "you" for unseen. And he quotes the Mandukya Upanishad in his Life Divine, and he says, "The unseen with whom there can be no pragmatic relations, unseizable, featureless, unthinkable, undesignable by name, whose substance is the certitude of oneself, in whom world existence is stilled, who is all peace and bliss. That is the self. That is what must be known." At the unseen's knock upon her hidden gates, her strength made greater by the lightning's touch, is it awoke from slumber in her heart's recess. It bore the stroke of that which kills and saves. Well, that Sri Aurobindo would capitalize. So that is the power of the constructive and destructive nature, a destructive force of nature. At every moment, nature is creating and destroying. At every moment. And we see that if we look at a distance at nature, we can see what is happening. We can see this is destroyed, this was rebuilt or built. But as we move our hands closer and closer, we get to that point where we no longer can see the difference in destruction and construction. Across the awful march no eye can see. This awful march is a dreadful march. It inspires fear. It's appalling. It's awe-inspiring. Barring its dreadful route, no will can change. Well, to bar something is to keep it out. What does she do? She faced the engines of the universe. Now he's going to talk about her very specifically. A heart stood in the way of the driving wheels. Remember we had a long discussion about the wheel last week, the Negro song a wheel in a wheel way in the middle of the sky. So these are the wheels of the universe that drive the universe. Its giant workings paused in front of a mind. Its stark conventions met the flame of a soul. A magic leverage suddenly is caught. This leverage, this strategic advantage, this power to act effectively, that moves the veiled ineffable's timeless will. What is this ineffable? Sri Aurobindo speaks about it, and he says that it's the immobile, immutable self, the Nirguna Brahman, the eternal without qualities, the pure, featureless one existence, the impersonal, the silence void of activities, the non-being. So, the ineffable, to make it short, is another word for the divine, another word for God.
Can we say spirit also, Narad?
Pardon?
Is it correct, spirit also?
No, it's higher than that. It's in the transcendent realms. But then he says this most beautiful quote, a prayer, a master act, a king idea can link man's strength to a transcendent force. And of course, Sri Aurobindo tells us that in the hymns of the mystic fire, force is nothing but the power of being in action. So, even our prayers, even our king ideas, our master acts can link our strength to that transcendent force. Force, of course, is the essential Shakti. Its energy is the working drive of the force, its active dynamism. Power is the capacity born of the force. So we see that energy science now understands. But they cannot understand anything beyond the five senses as yet. They don't understand ether. And ether is where it's all happening. Then miracle is made the common rule. Wow. Because he tells us that all is miracle here, and miracle can change. But then he tells us in other places there is no miracle, because all this creation is a miracle. Even the uncreation is a miracle, because the divine can choose to be whatever he wants. It is not a Christian symbology where a God up here does all the good and then the devil or the asura does all the evil. No, the divine is all these things. This is his play. This is his Leela. Then miracle is made the common rule. One mighty deed can change the course of things. This one mighty deed was accomplished by Sri Aurobindo and Mother in bringing down the supermental. This mighty deed of Christ was to bring love to the world. This mighty deed of Buddha was compassion for all beings. Not Buddhism, notice, but Buddha. A lonely thought becomes omnipotent. All now seems nature's massed machinery, an endless servitude to material rule. Servitude is slavery, an endless slavery to material rule, and long determination's rigid chain. Well, that determination is a fixed direction or tendency towards some end. He even says her firm and changeless habits aping law. Well, we know what it is to ape something. It is to mimic them. But notice that he capitalizes law. And I have to share with you a little bit on law, because law that we understand is in our ignorance on the lower plane of existence, body, life, and mind. The moment we can rise to the higher mind, illumined or intuitive, we don't have the same laws. There are some laws, but they're flexible. Here, they're quite rigid. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit suicide. Thou shalt not do this and that. So he says law is necessary for order and stability, but it becomes a conservative and hampering force unless it provides itself with an effective machinery for changing the laws as soon as circumstances and new needs make that desirable. And that's from the human cycle. In Essays Divine and Human, he concludes with, law is a process or a formula, but the soul is the user of processes and exceeds formulas. Her empire of unconscious deaf device annul the claim of man's free human will. And that, of course, is our karma. He, too, is a machine amid machines. A piston brain pumps out the shapes of thought. A beating heart cuts out emotions' modes. An insentient energy fabricates a soul. So he's telling us what we are here. We're a machine among machines. We do not act consciously from the soul. We react. We see duality everywhere. Good, bad, love, hate, all these things we see. And then he says a piston brain pumps out the shapes of thought, because thought has no capacity to know. Knowledge and thought are totally different. Thought is just the mind's working. He calls it a piston brain. A beating heart cuts out emotions' modes, because our hearts too are moved more by emotions than by bhakti. Much more by emotions. And insentient is something without feeling or sensation. An insentient energy fabricates a soul. Well, he's telling us this now in this second canto of the issue. Or the figure of the world reveals the signs of a tide chance, repeating her old steps in circles around matter's binding posts. Well, chance is karma, or it's a throw of the dice. And that's what the figure of the world reveals. It reveals those signs of this tide chance that we're unable to get out of because we cannot find the truth, capital T. He tells us that what we call chance is a play of the possibilities of the infinite. So it's a play of those possibilities. Binding posts are posts set in the ground, columns, things like that. A random series of inept events to which reason lends elusive sense is here. Wow. Random series. Everything to the scientist is a random series if he cannot use the tools of the five senses. inept, inappropriate, not fitting. Inept is different from inapt. We have to understand that, huh? Inapt is not willing to. Inapt to fold her wings, not interested in folding her wings. So inapt here, a random series, he calls it a random series even, of inept events to which reason lends elusive sense is here. And in the synthesis of yoga, Sri Aurobindo tells us the reason itself is only a special kind of application made by a surface regulating intelligence of suggestions which actually come from a concealed but sometimes partially overt and active power of the intuitive spirit. So these things can come, but reason lends elusive sense to them. And he says in the human cycle, reason is in its nature an imperfect light with a large but still restricted mission. And we see that reason can only establish half-lights and provisional order. It's not capable of more than that. So we have the thought mind and we have the reason. Or the empiric life's instinctive search. And that basically has been science for the last hundreds of years. Empirical, verified only by experience or experiment, but it's derived from that. And now science is in this huge quandary because of this new Webb telescope. It's revealing things that we never thought were there. And so there was no real Big Bang. And the question is always, what was there before the Big Bang? Or who was there before the Big Bang? It was the divine. So, the empiric life. In the letters on yoga, he says to us that life is the dynamic expression of consciousness force when thrown outward to realize itself in concrete harmonies of formation. And there's so much more on life that I hope you'll look it up in the lexicon. So the next one is, he feels his witnessing self and conscious power.
No, you missed
I missed one. What was it? Huh?
You missed 2 lines.
But wisdom comes. Or a vast ignorant mind's colossal work. But wisdom comes, and vision grows within. And when that happens, he tells us, then nature's instrument crowns himself her king. Notice he capitalizes nature here, because nature is the true Prakriti, the Prakriti that has descended with the Purusha from the one down into this multiplication of the millions. And so this true Prakriti is able to crown himself her king. He feels his witnessing self and conscious power. Now, in the essays on the Gita, Sri Aurobindo tells us about this witnessing self, this witness soul. And then he says, it is the immutable Purusha. He steps back and sees the light supreme. And I know I've quoted to you this passage on life many times, but I'd like to do it again today. In the Life Divine, he says, light is primarily a spiritual manifestation of the divine reality, illuminative and creative. Material light is a subsequent representation or conversion of it into matter for the purposes of the material energy. And now, this great passage. Our sense, by its incapacity, has invented darkness. In truth, there is nothing but light. Only it is a power of light either above or below our poor human vision's limited range. So we see that when light comes down, it becomes smaller and smaller, but it does not become darkness. It is never darkness. It is only a reduced form of light. And then he says, "For do not imagine that light is created by the suns. The suns are only physical concentrations of light, but the splendor they concentrate for us is self-born and everywhere." And then he concludes, God is everywhere. And wherever God is, there is light. And the mother finally says, and this she wrote to my friend Dmitri von Mohrenschildt, and he gave it to me. Now it's all over. The light is everywhere. The force is everywhere. And the world is so small. Now, a Godhead stands behind the brute machine. And in the essays on the Gita, this is one of the most beautiful expositions on the Godhead. I'll read just a part of it. The Godhead is all that is universe, and all that is in the universe, and all that is more than the universe. The Gita lays stress first on his supracosmic existence, for otherwise the mind would miss its highest goal and remain turned toward the cosmic only, or else attached to some partial experience of the divine in the cosmos. It lays stress next on his universal existence in which all moves and acts, for that is the justification of the cosmic effort, and that is the vast spiritual awareness in which the Godhead, self-seen as the time spirit, does his universal works. And now the last. Next, it insists with a certain austere emphasis on the acceptance of the Godhead as the divine inhabitant in the human body. For he is the immanent in all existences. And if the indwelling divinity is not recognized, not only will the divine meaning of human existence be missed, the urge to our supreme possibilities deprived of its greatest force, but the relations of soul with soul in humanity will be left petty, limited, and egoistic. This truth broke in a triumph of fire. We'll see that Sri Aurobindo often uses the same word twice. We've discussed that in All That Is He. And now here we have this truth broke in a triumph of fire. A victory was won for God in man. The deity revealed its hidden face. The great world mother now in her arose. These are extremely important lines because Mother has brought this to us, and some of us, were able to see the deity in her face. We can still see her, of course. She's around. But Sri Aurobindo tells us about the World Mother, and he capitalizes both words and even hyphenates it. So I quote a little bit from the Synthesis of Yoga. The Ishvara Shakti, divine conscious force, and world mother, becomes a mediatrix between the eternal one and the manifested many. On one side, by the play of the energies which she brings from the one, she manifests the multiple divine in the universe, involving and evolving its endless appearances out of her revealing substance. On the other, by the reascending current of the same energies, she leads back all towards that from which they have issued, so that the soul in its evolutionary manifestation may more and more return towards the divinity there or here, put on its divine character. So now we're going to see that this is what happened to Savitri. She makes a living choice. A living choice reversed fate's cold, dead turn, affirmed the spirit's tread on circumstance, pressed back the senseless, dire, revolving wheel, and Sri Aurobindo tells us in Essays Divine and Human, the infinite pauses always in the finite. The finite arrives always in the infinite. This is the wheel that circles forever through time and eternity. He says much more on this, and stopped the mute march of necessity. So what has happened now? A living choice of Savitri reversed this cold, dead turn of fate, affirmed the spirit's tread on circumstance, pressed back the senseless, dire, revolving wheel, and stopped the mute march of necessity. A flaming warrior from the eternal peaks, empowered to force the door denied and closed, smote from death's visage its dumb absolute. And here we have to remember always that dumb in Savitri means silent or mute, and burst the bounds of consciousness and time. I always like to read Sri Aurobindo's definitions of words that we may consider ordinary, for they are anything but. He gives us so much when he capitalizes a word. Everything in Savitri, of course, is totally conscious. Even and the are there consciously, because he tells us, I only write what I have seen or experienced. And he told this to Amal many, many times when Amal would make a correction. He said, I think this would be better. Sri Aurobindo said, no, it came from there, it's the correct word. Our time is about up. Do we have any questions?
What is this necessity, which is capital and circumstance with capital C?
And stop the mute march of necessity, was that?
Yes.
Okay. You wanted to know the definition of necessity here. Did you?
I know the definition of English definition, but why is it capital here? Is it
Yes.
specific?
Well, it's very important because in the essays in philosophy and yoga, he tells us necessity is the child of the spirit's free self-determination. What affects us as necessity is a will which works in sequence and not a blind force driven by its own mechanism. So it's a very important term. What we call necessity is a truth of things working itself out in a time sequence of the infinite. So necessity is a truth of things that are working themselves out, and it is the child of the Spirit's free self-determination. When we are self-determined, necessity is very important to us. Any other?
Narad, always I thought when I read this line,
You have to speak a little
when
louder.
I read these lines, I
Yeah.
always thought a prayer is the master act and is the king idea.
No, there are three different things. He tells us first a prayer that can change things. He tells us that a master act can change things. So they're all three different aspects.
Like praying or prayer is the master act.
No,
One
no.
single definition for a word.
Pardon?
It's a one single word definition.
All the three are single words, correct.
Different words.
So a king idea, you see, a king idea is very important. Huh? This king idea, some of us have king ideas. Certainly Vivekananda had it. And he appears to Sri Aurobindo for 2 weeks in the jail. And he gives Sri Aurobindo the hint of the supramental. The first time Sri Aurobindo ever had it, it came from Vivekananda. So these master acts are extremely important. We can have them too. We can love others with a love that's total. That's a divine love, not a human love with all its failings and its problems. Although human love does help people to rise above themselves.
And also I found that piston brain pumps, that passage, it's very sharp at the same time. It is very, it's very much
Accurate.
and
Very
significant
accurate.
lines.
Yes, exactly. And so Sri Aurobindo insists that we have to become silent and we have to stop these thoughts that come into our minds. There are two ways to do it. Sri Aurobindo's way was to stop the thoughts completely, but then he came into the blank universe, the cosmic universe, where things were not quite real. But there's another way too, and Temi told me that. She said, I let them come through, but I don't pay them any attention. But of course, Sri Aurobindo's way is much more powerful, because when we can stop them before entering, that's when we really progress.
You can read from the beginning to end.
Ah, yes. Would you like to do that?
At the unseen's knock upon the hidden gates, her strength made greater by the lightning's touch, awoke from slumber in her heart's recess. It bore the stroke of that which kills and saves. Across the awful march no eye can see, barring its dreadful route no will can change. She faced the engines of the universe. A heart stood in the way of the driving wheels. Its giant workings paused in front of a mind. Its stark conventions met the flame of a soul. A magic leverage suddenly is caught that moves the veiled ineffable's timeless will. A prayer, a master act, a king idea can link man's strength to a transcendent force. Then miracle is made the common rule. One mighty deed can change the course of things. A lonely thought becomes omnipotent. All now seems nature's massed machinery, an endless servitude to material rule. and long determination's rigid chain. Her firm and changeless habits aping law, her empire of unconscious deft device annul the claim of man's free human will. He too is a machine amid machines. A piston brain pumps out the shapes of thought. A beating heart cuts out emotions' modes. An insentient energy fabricates a soul. Or the figure of the world reveals the signs of a tied chance repeating her old steps in circles around matter's binding pose. A random series of inept events to which reason lends elusive sense is here, or the empiric life's instinctive search, or a vast ignorant mind's colossal work. But wisdom comes, and vision grows within. Then nature's instrument crowns himself her king. He feels his witnessing self and conscious power. His soul steps back and sees the light supreme. A godhead stands behind the brute machine. This truth broke in a triumph of fire. A victory was won for God in man. The deity revealed its hidden face. The great world mother now in her arose, a living choice, reversed fate's cold dead turn, affirmed the spirit's tread on circumstance, pressed back the senseless dire revolving wheel, and stopped the mute march of necessity. A flaming warrior from the eternal peaks, empowered to force the door denied and closed, smote from death's visage its dumb absolute, and burst the bounds of consciousness and time.
So we went a little bit long today because I wanted to get the feeling what Savitri has determined to do, what she has accomplished, what she has the power to do. And next week we'll begin a new chapter in which we see Sri Aurobindo in the personage of Ashwini, having his first experiences and growing in consciousness. And it's a beautiful chapter because he reveals so much of himself and what he went through in his life. Namaste.
Narad, I still have a question. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Why is this, if the necessity is self-determined free will of the soul, why is it a mute march of necessity?
It's a silent march of necessity.
Oh, not
it's not
like,
a loud thing at all. It's a quiet thing.
And it has to be stopped? Why should the soul's predetermined free will, determined, self-determined free will be stopped by the Great World Mother?
No, it's not. I'd have to get back to it. A living choice reversed fate's cold dead turn. So we're talking about fate here. It even affirmed the spirit's tread on circumstance. It pressed back this senseless, dire, revolving wheel, and it stopped the mute march of necessity. The silent march of necessity is stopped, and we have to read those lines above that, because then below that he tells us that this flaming warrior from the eternal peaks, this warrior is empowered to force this door that's denied and closed. And it even smote from death's visage his face, the dumb absolute, and burst the bounds of consciousness and time. So this senseless, dire revolving wheel has to stop. This mute march of necessity has to be replaced by the burst bounds of consciousness and time. Have to see it all as a paragraph.